The next key bit of functionality we're going to need in the app is the ability to mark a task as complete, to tap on the checkbox, to cross it off. So in order for us to do that, now would be a good time to finish off our task item layout. So I'm in item_task.xml. If I just quickly load up the emulator, this is the tasks app, and you can see I've added to the some new task the second line for some details. Okay. If there are no details, then the view is gone, and you can see that just the title is centered. But if we do have details, then we have the two lines, and then the checkbox button and then the star button are centered around the text. So we're going to need a couple of things. We're going to need a checkbox on the left. This is the thing the user taps to mark a task as complete. We're not going to bother with the fancy animation just for now. In fact, we probably won't even bother with the circle checkbox for now. We'll stick with the standard one, as later on we'll be learning how we can swap the default checkbox icon, both in an unchecked and checked state. You can see the checked state there is a tick, where we can swap the checkbox button for different things, both in a checked and unchecked state, like this. So we need a checkbox on the left, and we also need a type of checkbox on the right to star the icon as well. So let's get straight to it. So in our layout, what we'll do above the two text views is we'll quickly add a checkbox or even a material checkbox, keep things nice and modern. Width, we'll do wrap content for the height, self-closing tag, and we'll straight away give it an ID of the checkbox. And we'll do start to the start of the parent, which will ensure it's at the very left side. But then we'll do top to the top of the parent and bottom to the bottom of the parent. And what that's going to do is center it in the container. Now at the moment things are overlapping, but you can just about see how that checkbox square is centered in the text. In fact, it's centered perfectly within the constraint layout. So that will be a nice effect doing this. So to fix the text now, we need to change the width from match parent to 0 dp. I'll do that for both of them. And now we need to constrain it horizontally. So we'll do start to the end of the checkbox and end to the end of the parent. So that will fill the remaining space. And what we'll do, to make sure we don't have to keep changing both text views, we'll constrain the second text view to the first text view. So we can now do start to the start of this text view title, as well as end to the end of the text view title. Okay, and you can see that looks nice. When I compare with the emulator, I would suggest that the difference in the size of the text is a bit bigger than we have it. Probably the text is 17 SP and the details is 14 SP. So we'll do the same. And it probably needs a little bit of space between them. So we'll do some margin top. Maybe just something like 4 dp. Yeah, that looks a bit nicer. And then the final thing we need to do, we've got padding of 12 all the way around the outside, but the effect that that has is the checkbox doesn't appear to be centered between the edge of the screen and the text. So if we have that 12 dp padding around the whole container, then probably adding just another 12 dp will fix that problem. So if we just do it on the text view title, then you should see the description, or the details rather, also moving across. So we'll do margin start 12 dp, and you can see they both move across together. It's probably a bit too much having 12 dp plus the margin or the padding of the checkbox. And so I think what I'll do is I'll do padding top and bottom of the container 12 dp. So padding bottom 12 dp. But we'll do padding start and end a bit less, maybe 8 dp. Padding end 8 dp. And then we can do the same for the margin start of the text view. Or maybe even 6 dp. 6 dp there, there, and there. Yeah, that looks a bit better to me. Okay. So we have our checkbox to say whether or not the item is complete. The user will tap that square on the left-hand side. We also need another type of checkbox for our star. Now, if you remember, back to when we made our add task dialog, that bottom sheet dialog, we had the problem there where, when we were creating the task, well, we had our star icon button or image button, but we weren't able to have it in either a on or off state. And actually, what we need isn't a button at all, but it is another checkbox. So I'll go ahead and add another checkbox. We'll do wrap content again, wrap content, but this time we'll do end to the end of the parent, and we'll center it vertically. Say whether or not the top and bottom of the container 12 dp. So padding bottom 12 dp, but we'll do padding start and end a bit less dp, 6 dp. The task dialog, that bottom sheet dialog, we had the problem there where, when we were creating the task, well, we had our star icon button or image button, but we weren't able to have it in either a on or off state. And actually, what we need isn't a button at all, but it is another checkbox. So I'll go ahead and add another checkbox. We'll do wrap content again, wrap content, but this time we'll do end to the end of the parent, and we'll center it vertically as well with top to the top of the parent, bottom to the bottom of the parent, and self-closing tag. And we'll just give it an ID quickly, and we'll say this is the checkbox underscore star. Maybe that's going to be confusing having one called checkbox and one checkbox star. So maybe toggle star might be more appropriate. Okay. But as you can see, we just have two squares. Now, luckily for us, there's a simple attribute you can set on a checkbox that allows us to change the icon used for the checkbox. And that is simply button, Android::button. And this can now be a drawable. So if I change this to drawable icon star, you can see that the checkbox changes to a star. However, we have a slight problem. If I scroll up to the first checkbox and mark it as checked in the XML, well, we can see the checkbox in a checked state. It looks very nice. It has a fill of the square in our primary color and then a white tick or check. However, if I do the same thing for our star icon, so I do checked and then true, well, nothing happens. So we need to find a way to have an outline star when this toggle star isn't checked, but then have it filled in, ideally in our primary color attribute, when it is in a checked state. And to do that, we're going to need to learn a new concept to do with selectors and conditionally having a different drawable depending on what state our view is in. So let's learn about selector drawables in the next tutorial. Following on from the previous tutorial, we now have a checkbox with a custom drawable for our toggle_star checkbox. However, it doesn't respond or change if it's checked or not. With checked true, it's an outline. With checked false, it's an outline. There's no visual difference between this being checked or not. So what can we do? Maybe you'd be hoping for some sort of attribute like button checked or something like that, but unfortunately that's no good to us. However, the Android system and the resources has a fantastic solution for this, for widgets or views that can have different states, such as checked, not checked, disabled, and that is with the concept of a selector. We can create a drawable selector, and we can define multiple different states of a view and provide a different drawable for each of those states. It might sound a bit confusing, so let's jump straight into making this. So we'll open up the project pane, and I'm going to quickly press the target button to jump into our resource folder. That's the layout folder. But if we go into the drawable folder and then right click, we can do a new drawable resource file. So let's do that. And we're going to call this our icon_star_selector. And the root element we want to be a selector. So if you have a different root element, please delete it. Start typing with a lowercase s selector, and then the normal one, not the animated one, and then autocomplete, and then OK. So we have this selector. And what we're able to do within this selector is define different items for the different states a view could be in. So we'll make a new tag with a lowercase I for item, then a space, and we can provide a couple of attributes that will define what state the view could be in, and then a specific drawable for that state. So we can define a state for when something is selected, and the way we do that is with Android::state, and because we're using a checkbox, we want to be going with state checked. The attribute is checked in a checkbox. So when it is true, that's the first part, and then we do another attribute called Android::drawable, and we can provide a specific drawable for when it is in a checked state. For now, we'll just do our old outlined icon star, but in a moment we will create a filled in version, and then self-closing tag. And then if I duplicate this line, we could then do state checked equals false, and then do the other one. But actually, we can remove that line altogether and just have a default state, because the way the selector file works is it will read from top to bottom, and as soon as it finds a match, it will return that drawable. So when our checkbox is checked, it will return this top one, and it won't read any further. So then this second line, with no specific state provided, this will be our default one. So if it's not state checked, it will go down to the second line, and as we have no filter here, then this is the default drawable. So this is pretty much all we need to do. We just need to provide ourselves a filled-in icon. So in the resource manager, we'll add a new vector asset. So we have our outline star from before, and if I click the clip art and filter by star, well then we have a simple star icon which is filled in. So I'll select that one, simply called star in my window, and then OK. And we'll call this our icon_star_filled, and we'll go next, and then finish. And then if we double click on the left into the icon star field to jump to the vector code, vectors are quite confusing, some very strange numbers representing the vector path. So please don't touch anything else, but the one thing we can touch is the tint. If we clear off this manual black hex code we have here, and we can do our attributes here. So we'll do $attr and simply color primary. And if you look to the right, you can see how that starts here. And we can do our attributes here. So we'll do $attr and simply color primary. And if you look to the right, you can see how that star immediately changes to our primary color. So if we go back to our selector file, and then we can change the icon_star for icon_star filled. And now if I change the resource manager to our project pane, you can see in our drawable folder, we have this icon_star_selector.xml. And in terms of our layout files, this selector file will behave just like a drawable. We can reference it as drawable icon_star_selector, but it's like a conditional drawable. The actual physical drawable that's returned will depend on which one of these items matches. So let's head to item underscore task. And rather than setting the button to icon star, watch what happens when we change it to icon underscore star selector. Well, checked as false, so we have our outlined star, but when I change it to true, well then the star fills in, which is absolutely fantastic. And just to show you this in action and how it will toggle between the two states, if I just remove the two checked attributes for now, so I'll delete that, and delete that one there, and then run the app, we can see now our item views, some with descriptions, some without. We need to provide a little bit of code that makes the description text view gone if there's no details. We can do that later. But clicking the checkbox, we get the nice click effect, and then the filled in square with a tick. That's the default checkbox behavior in Material 3. But if we click on our stars, we can also toggle them. We get the same nice click effect, that ripple behind the star, and we can toggle these on and off, or rather checked and unchecked. So selectors are a fantastic way to provide a conditional drawable to things like checkboxes and radio buttons, things that can have a different state. So we're now in a really strong position to work on the functionality to actually update our tasks to being either completed or starred. So let's look at doing that in the next few tutorials. Now we have our task item layout updated. The next bit of functionality to introduce is actually marking a task as complete. I'm in the task entity, our data class, that represents our task table. And the reason is we need to make a change to our task table, our task entity. We have a property for is_starred, but we don't have one for is_completed. So how can we possibly differentiate between the tasks in our database which are complete and not complete? So to do this, we'll go ahead and add another property to our data class. So underneath is_starred, we'll do a comma, and we'll name the column info using snake case. So name equals is complete, but then we'll use regular camel case as this is preferred in Kotlin. So is complete. Again, this can be a Boolean, and again, this can default to false. And you may think that's all we need now to start adding new data into our database. However, let's go ahead and run the app and see what happens. Okay, and it seems we get a crash. If we head over to Logcat and scroll up, Room cannot verify the data integrity. Looks like you've changed the schema but forgot to update the version number. You can simply fix this by increasing the version number. Okay, so that's quite a helpful error message to have. The translation there is, by changing the task table, we have changed our database schema, the structure of our database. And the existing data in our database doesn't know what to do about that. So let's head over to our getItDone database and scroll to the top. Looking at the Logcat message, it says, we forgot to update the version number. We can fix this by increasing the version number. So then you may think, let's just change this to 2 and all is good. So let's do exactly that and then run this again. Well, it seems we get another crash. So let's head back to Logcat and see what we have this time. A migration from 1 to 2 was required, but not found. So now we're onto the weird and wonderful world of database migrations. I'll just go ahead and close the Logcat. If you have a database with existing records, existing rows in various tables, but then you change the tables, maybe you rename the columns, delete a column, add a new column, as we've done, well, to put it simply, the existing data doesn't know what to do. If we look at our task entity, this new column, the isComplete property that's a Boolean, it's not a nullable Boolean, it's just Boolean. And so for all of those records in the table that don't have any data value for this new isComplete column, how's it supposed to know which value to put in there? After all, this equals false default value, that's just for Kotlin, but the actual database itself has absolutely no idea. And that's what's meant by a migration. As we're migrating from one structure to another, typically you would need to provide some detailed instructions for what to do with the existing data. However, the full topic of performing database migrations, to learn about it properly, will take a fair bit of time, and so I'm going to reserve that for the next section we do, where we take our database learning even further. For now, I'm here to show you there's a very quick and slightly messy way you can get around this problem. Looking down here in our getDatabase function, we can call a function on our database builder that will effectively say, if you get any change in database version, for example, if you have a version 1 of a database installed on a phone, but then you run the app and it has moved to version 2, well, simply just delete all of the data and start again. So this line of code that I'm about to show you is a very quick and dirty solution to just forcing through any changes, and it's at the expense of any existing data that you've got. You would never have this line of code in a production app with real users, as you're basically deleting every single bit of your users' data. However, we've not finished our app yet, we don't have any users yet, and so this function is quite useful for development. As in the next section, when we do perform a proper database migration, you'll see it's quite a bit of work. And right now, as we've not finished this app at all, we don't need to bother with that. We can simply delete all existing data, change the database schema, and effectively start again at version 2. So after the bracket, but before the .build function, for me that's on line 25, we'll make some line breaks, And so before .build, you can call dot fallback to destructive migration. A simple function just like that. And if we hover over this function, it says, this allows Room to destructively recreate database tables if migrations are not found. And this simple, but somewhat dangerous function will allow us to change our database schema, as we've done here by adding a new column. We still need to change the version so that the app on the phone knows that we're moving to a new version of the database, but it will know to not bother trying to migrate the existing data. It will instead just delete all of it. So the end result of this is the app won't crash now, but you're going to see all of our tasks that we had have disappeared. And to be honest, that's okay because they were mostly junk tasks anyway. So let's run the app. And so this time, no crash, but also no tasks. They've all been deleted. However, we can go ahead and start adding new tasks. My brand new task. Let's add some details as well with some details and then save. And we can start to populate our database with new data. Okay, I'll just close the run pane. During development, but before you've got any real users, if you know you may be changing your database schema, tweaking your tables, adding new columns, deleting columns, maybe adding whole new tables, well, you can call .fallback to destructive migration within your Room database builder. And whenever you change the database, you simply bump the database version, and this function will just delete all of your data and start again whenever the version is increased. Okay? But now, with our isComplete column in our table, and remember we can inspect this by going to App Inspection, and looking at the table, and we can see there we have a new column for isComplete. So with this new isComplete column, we're in a good position now to add the functionality to mark off our tasks as complete. So let's do that in the next tutorial. Now we have the isComplete property on our tasks and in our database, we're in a good position to perform the update operation so that when the user clicks the checkbox to mark the task complete, we mark it as incomplete in the database and maybe provide some kind of visual cue that it is completed, such as striking through the text, putting a line through it. Before we can do that though, we need to learn a new concept to do with recycler views. So here I have just one item in my recycler view. I can go ahead and add another one with description. Okay, so I have a couple of items in this recycler view. However, previously, when we did lists and recycler views, we didn't need any code for reacting to the items being clicked. They simply displayed things, our bucket list items, our projects. But now, when the user clicks on one of these items, we actually need to respond to that. And this is a very common need when programming, to respond to item clicks within a list. So, how do we do that? As always, there are a couple of ways, but by far the most common and simple way is using a listener interface. Very similar to when we have click listeners on buttons, we can actually define a task item click listener within our adapter. So, moving over to the tasks adapter, under the inner class for the view holder, we'll go ahead and define a new interface, and this will simply be our task item or our task updated listener. So nice and easy, interface, and we'll call this with a capital T, task updated listener. So we're defining a contract here. If anybody is a task updated listener, they're going to have this functionality. So when the user clicks a checkbox or taps a star, well, we're going to update that task and notify the listener. So our function can simply be on task updated, and we'll pass in the updated task. So that's all we need for our listener. And then what we'll do is we'll say that the tasks fragment update or taps a star, well, we're going to update that task and notify the listener. So our function can simply be on task updated, and we'll pass in the updated task. So that's all we need for our listener. And then what we'll do is we'll say that the tasks fragment itself is the listener. So we can go to the very top where it says the tasks fragment extends the fragment class with the curly brackets. We can do a comma and say it also implements the tasks adapter dot task updated listener. And this is very similar to how a button click listener works. And we've covered this concept in detail quite a while ago when we learned about interfaces and how and when you might use them. So of course we have an error now, and that error says we're not implementing the onTaskUpdated function. You can either do Alt-Enter, implement members, and then do enter that way, or just for a change, and I'll do this at the very bottom, you can just start typing onTaskUpdated, and because we're implementing that interface, Android Studio knows what we're trying to do. We can autocomplete that, and we have the onTaskUpdated function here. So the next thing we can do is say to the tasks adapter, hey, I am a TaskUpdated listener, and the way we'll do that is by adding it into the constructor. So back in the tasks adapter, we'll provide not only the list of tasks, but with a comma, we'll also provide a private val, a listener for short, and that will be our TaskUpdated listener. So heading back now to the tasks fragment, we're getting an error. So we need to also assign our listener, and that can now be this, because this class, the tasks fragment, well, it implements the TaskUpdated listener. Our tasks fragment is now a TaskUpdated listener. So we're passing in the fragment itself. And that's one of the most common ways you can communicate from class to class, or in our case, from our adapter to the fragment, through an interface. Okay? So let's go one step further. Let's actually make this do something. So we actually need to respond to whenever the checkbox is changed. So within each individual view holder, we'll do binding dot, and we'll start with our checkbox, but we can do the star toggle as well. Checkbox dot, and then it's add on checked state listener. For the checkbox, we're using the Material 3 checkbox, and this doesn't have a simple checked or unchecked state. It can have 3 states, one for checked, one for not checked, and another for the minus symbol, which they call indeterminate. You might see this sometimes if you have like a list of checkboxes and you have maybe a select all box at the top, and then if you select only a few of the children, it might have this minus symbol. We don't need to dig into that. We just need to understand that the Material checkbox has 3 states. So add onChecked state changed listener. So whenever the checkbox state has changed, this will fire. We're not going to need access to our checkbox parameter, so we can do an underscore for that, but we do need the state. And then in here, we can check the state. And we'll do that with a when statement. So when the state, and then curly brackets. And this state is actually part of the Material checkbox. If we start typing Material checkbox, uppercase, and then dot, well, you can see the 3 states there. State checked, state unchecked, and state indeterminate. That hyphen or minus symbol that we're not going to be using. So these are the 2 we want, checked and unchecked. So what we'll say is, when the state is checked, do one thing. Otherwise, do another thing. So what do we want to do? Well, really, if I just make a line break, we want to take our task and update the isCompleted state to be true. However, we can't do that. Val cannot be reassigned. If I click into this, we've made all of these a val. We've made them immutable. And I would like to leave them as immutable. It's best practice to have the data class be fixed once we've got it from the database. So what can we do? I'll just comment out that line. That won't work. Well, fortunately for us, there's a very useful function in Kotlin where you can clone an object. So we can do task dot and then copy. And now, as we know and understand named arguments, we can simply change the isComplete to be true, and then we can assign this to a new variable, our updated task. Clever, right? However, we also need to do that in the else statement. So we would also need to do updated task equals task.copy here. And if it's not checked, we set it to false. And after we've done this, we're going to need to call the onTaskUpdated function on our listener. So rather than capturing the local variable here, if we remove this local variable there and there, we can actually assign it to our when statement. So we'll put updated task here. So our updated task equals, when the state is checked, well, we copy the task, but change isComplete to true. And if the state is not checked, we copy the task and change isComplete to false. So then we can simply do listener.onTaskUpdated and return our updated task. I'll tidy this code a bit by changing these to one-liners. So I'll remove those brackets, do that on one line, remove those brackets. Let's do it on one line and then auto format. So a quick recap, we're adding the onChecked state change listener, there's a mouthful, onto our checkbox. We only need the state parameter of that listener function. And then what we do is we inspect it with a when statement. When it's checked, we clone the task, but in the new copy we change isComplete to true. And if it's not checked, we clone the task but change the isComplete status to false. And once we've done that, we have our listener right at the very top in our tasks adapter, and that's our fragment. So we call the onTaskUpdated function on our listener. And that means in the tasks fragment, we will receive the updated task. So then we can open a new thread, do our task DAO, and then call update task, and this will be our updated task. Okay. We won't change the UI for updated tasks in this tutorial. We'll do that in the next tutorial. We can use the database inspector in just a moment to confirm that this is working. Before we do that though, one more thing we should do. Back in the tasks adapter, it's actually the exact same logic for when the user taps on the star checkbox. So if we do binding.toggle_star.add_onCheckedStateListener, okay, we've got a small problem. If we command click on the toggle star, it seems we made this just a regular checkbox, whereas the complete checkbox, the square, is a material checkbox. So that was a small mistake. So it's a very easy fix. We will also change the toggle star to be a material checkbox. That one there. The button attribute still works there, so no problem whatsoever. Okay. And now back in the task adapter, if we start typing add on checked state change listener and go to this third one for me, the one with the curly brackets, and then change the checkbox to an underscore. We don't need that, but we do need the state. A challenge for you now would be to pause the video and follow the exact same logic as above for the checkbox, but apply it not to the isComplete property, but to the isStarred property. So please go ahead and do this, pause the video, and do the logic for the isStarred checked state change listener. Okay, so the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to copy all of those 4 lines and paste them there, and quite simply replace isComplete for isStarred. If the toggle star is checked, then we mark isStarred as true, otherwise we mark isStarred as false. So that is the code we need to both listen for checkbox changes and the mechanism to then communicate back to the fragment using this listener. So if we go ahead now and run the app, okay, and then we head to app inspection and wait for the database to connect, and then double click on the task table if it's not already open. And if we select live update, so at the moment we can see my brand new task and another one is 0 for isStarred and 0 for isComplete. So they're neither marked as complete or starred. And if I load up my emulator, and I'll just shrink it a little bit, like that. Now please note, you're not going to be seeing these tasks crossed off or any visual indicator that they're complete, other than the checkboxes. But as I change these, take note on the database below with what happens. So when I check my brand new task, if I look down, isComplete is now 1. And then if I uncheck that, it returns to 0. I can mark the another one task as starred, and we can see that isStarred is 1. However, do note if we update both of them, let's say I mark another one as complete now. Well, it doesn't say both isStarred and isComplete. And there is a reason for that. We haven't actually refreshed the list of tasks, so it's only really paying attention to the last checkbox you clicked. It doesn't have the new data. It doesn't know that another one is starred. So don't worry if you are clicking around and you notice that bug. That's going to get fixed in the next tutorial, where we refresh the list and we update the UI by crossing out the complete tasks. Okay? But the fantastic thing is now, for the first time using recycler views, we are communicating back to the fragment when we interact with the recycler view. If I just attach the debugger to show you this, and in the tasks adapter, I'll put a breakpoint on the line where the listener is about to be called on task updated, and another one at the start of the task updated listener. So now, when I click the checkbox, we hit the breakpoint there, and then we immediately fire out to the tasks fragment. Okay, so using an interface is the way we communicate between a recycler view and the fragment or activity, and the checked state change listener is how we respond to the checkbox changes. Okay, fantastic. In the next tutorial, let's refresh the list of tasks every time they're updated, and then update the UI to strike through our completed tasks.